finding out once again. Time for the longest running show on COVID with guest stars Tony tonight. They are the Fab Four together again. And I just put a tweet out. I got a little bet going. Will Omicron or Lincoln Riley Cron be the first topic tonight, Dr. Bookman? We're all waiting to see which
one are we more pissed about?
Yeah. So here comes the answer. Topic number one, Dr. Bookman, is
Lincoln Riley. The deserter in our midst has left the premises. So, what I can say is to everybody who's an OU fan, stay calm. I have ultimate faith in the King, Barry, the superhero Bob Stoops, and the all-world Joe Castiglione. So we'll be okay. It may take a while, but the ship will right itself. I first want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving holiday. Got to spend it with friends and family. And yes, we are going to talk about the Omicron variant. Now in 17 countries, small numbers, not a lot known yet, but everybody's talking. Is it more serious? Is it more infectious? Is there going to be more deaths? Are the vaccines going to hold up? So we're going to try to talk about what the science is on all that. And we'll start off with Dr. Chansolme, our resident COVID expert. What's your opinion? We don't know a lot right now.
I think Riley should have waited for a bowl game. We're talking about the other thing. My bad. I'm sorry. They didn't have to burn the house down on the way out. No. Omicron is interesting. Just kind of reading, what the WHO is putting out is where most of it's coming from. The CDC hasn't really had much input yet because it's been overseas in Africa where the World Health Organization is much more active. Reading what they've put out, it's interesting. It's certainly it kind of jumped the line. Normally, these new variants go from variant of interest first and then to variant of concern. But there was obviously enough there that they felt like it should rise straight to VOC, which means one of several things. Either there's an increased chance of transmissibility, an increased chance of pathogenicity, or an increased chance of evasion of current therapeutics or immunity. So those are kind of the three things that move you from VOI to VOC. And so, I mean, it sounds like it's a transmissibility factor right now. There's not a whole lot of evidence that it is or is not more severe, although, we've seen coronaviruses before that can be much more severe, even the coronaviruses we've had. So that's a possibility. I think a lot of this stuff will just have to play out. As far as, you got to remember, we've been saying for a long time that the more you have vaccination, the less you have spread, the less you have transmission, the less you have replication, and thus the less potential you have for mutation. This is something that arose in a country that has about a 35 to 40% vaccination rate. And when we talk about health disparities among nations, this is what we're talking about. This is, when we're not deploying the vaccines in the same way across the world, this is kind of, so, and it's easy to say it's their problem. Well, it very well could be our problem too. So what I've been telling people, I've been interviewed a couple times about this, is for me, it's no different than what I said before. I still think vaccination is the safest thing and the best thing to do. Now that the boosters have essentially been blessed for all adults over the age of 18, go get your booster if you have an opportunity, because that's still going to be the thing that you can do the most. Let's be honest. We're not going back on lockdown. We're not going to shut the venues down. I know they have some travel restrictions, but that hasn't worked in the past effectively, and I don't think it's going to work now. So we have to continue to find things. Now, Pfizer said, in 100 days, they could turn around a new thing if they have to, which makes me wonder, is there some smoke somewhere there that somebody's saying that they think that this could totally evade vaccination? I don't know. I think we just need more data. Right now we have snippets of information. The earliest sample was from November 11th in Botswana. It really wasn't, the alarm wasn't sounded until November 24th. So, I mean, we are literally less than a week into this. We have to give science a chance to catch up.
I will say, while we don't have the science and we don't have the studies or the true data, what we have heard from both Israel and South Africa is that those severe cases have all been in unvaccinated, that they're seeing mild cases in the vaccinated. So it does appear that while the vaccines may take a hit, they're still our best chance to avoid serious illness. I've not read anything pediatric wise. Dwight, have you heard anything in the pediatric literature about this?
Not so far. I mean, like David's saying, I think it's too early to really tell. The only thing I'm hearing is it may be a little more infectious than Delta, but the severity seems, and I suspect that's going to be the case with the kids. That's been kind of the trend we've seen overall. And if the adults are faring fairly well, I suspect, and it's too early to really make much conclusion, that it's probably going to be that way with the kids. That there'll be some hospitalizations, but probably not as much as what we would see in the adult population. So I think we just have to wait and see. The one thing I would say real quickly is we're not seeing a big turnout yet. I just looked at the data as far as the 5 to 12 age group, and it's low. The number, I think 13% of that age group.
It's about what we thought it was going to be, wasn't it, Dwight? Based on some stuff,
We're kind of in a malaise right now. Yeah. Here we go again. Your Delta's kind of waning, so people are taking the eye off the ball, and I think we're going to have more of a crisis to get people out. Same way with the adolescent population. It's dropped way off. We were seeing at the peak of about 1 million adolescents a week getting in. I think last week is 108,000. So it's everything's dropped back, and time will tell. We're just going to have to keep an eye on it and see where we go.
I don't know if you saw, but Pfizer this afternoon announced that they're going to apply for EUA on 16 and 17-year-old for boosters. So
and they've also got the changeover done. Should this, how we pronounce it, Omicron or whatever, they do already have vaccine ready should that need. Of course, they're not recommending it yet. I heard that today. Pfizer's doing that. So,
John, what's your opinion? You always go into the depths of people's minds, and I want to transition from that into what you brought up about the federal judge's decision on mandates. So
yeah, I guess on Omicron, I think on the positive side, we surfaced a potential threat early, although it's already in 13 countries. So I guess it's been floating around for a while. But the bad side of this is I don't think our communication system, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but this is a different, I guess, variant on the same problem that, we had a lot of hand-wringing about the Mu variant, that was going to take over the world and kill us all. And it didn't, fortunately. There was a little rumblings about Lambda. That was even less than Mu turned out. But both of those went away very quickly, fortunately. And now we've got an early sign. I think the WHO, I'm not sure I fully understand the gradations of worry, and I get that they're genetic markers that are concerning, but it seems that clinically it is yet to declare itself as to what it really is.
I agree.
And it seems hard to make the leap into this kind of pre-lockdown or of concern. We've kind of ratcheted up really quickly, and the media's run with it. The media has shown that they're going to take. COVID cells, right? So you just gave them a whole week's worth of conversation. They rolled out Fauci again, and everybody's ginned up the mill because that's what we've been trained to do for the last 2 years. So, okay, I wish we could send the warning note and then have the patience to get more data. This reminds me of the thing in Superman. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. Who knows what it is?
I couldn't agree more.
Jump in there really early.
Yeah.
And in this case, I think the level of the stock market response is an indication of just the kind of damage and disruption you can do on speculation at this point. So it's kind of it's good and bad, I guess. I'm glad we know about it enough to be aware, but it seems like we're way ahead, and nobody is saying. Fauci's not sitting there telling us, let's get more data. We don't even know if they're going to have hospitalizations because that tends to lag. The early cases tend to lag the more severe developed wave. So we don't even know what the burden is going to be. So, and I guess when you read these stories, there's so many caveats. Oh, we don't know if South Africa is representative of other populations because they're under vaccinated, right? So, okay, that's a pretty big asterisk for what is going to happen in America. I don't know. It's just I guess good and bad, but I tend to be a bit frustrated that we can't put better perspective. We knew from Mu. Where was the analysis on what we learned on Mu, right? Where was the post-action that said we were right to alert people, but we were wrong to paint this scenario of genetic mutations that concerned us in the spike protein, or whatever we were supposed to have learned with that near miss? I don't recognize, maybe Dr. Sublett, Dr. Chansolme, Larry, maybe you recognize something that came out of Mu that we were able to be smarter afterwards and say, oh, well, we won't do that again.
Well, I mean, we don't celebrate the successes as much as we denigrate the misses, right? I mean, I agree with you 100%, Sean. I think we didn't say enough about Mu, because to me, it's like when you read any study on any disease that you work on, to me, the bottom line is always what happens to the patient in this situation. If you tell me, just from an ID world, they say, oh, this drug decreases the colony count, or this antiseptic decreases the colony count of staph on surfaces. That's awesome. Great. Wonderful. I don't care. I want to know, are my patients healthier because of it? And it's the same thing with these genetic mutations on Omicron or Delta or Mu or Lambda or any other ones that we were supposed to be terrified about. Does it translate into the things that elevate you to a variant of concern? And I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying it's way too early to know. Now, there are way smarter people than I working on this kind of stuff who may be able to read the tea leaves a lot better, and that's why it went straight to VOC instead of going through VOI. But again, same thing. I do believe that we learned from Delta that the more vaccinated your population, the less likely the wildfire is to rip. And so if Omicron's not here already, it's going to be here this week.
Yeah.
And it'll be the lead story on the news because Lincoln Riley's already gone. It'll be the lead story on the news that Omicron was found at a bingo hall in Idaho, or something like that. And we'll say, oh my gosh. But then the question is, does everybody else at the bingo hall get it? And do all the people that went to church at the bingo hall people get it? I mean, that's the question. And how many of them in the hospital?
I want to bring up even another aspect of this, the alarmism that the press pushes and sells. What's that doing to the mental health of a lot of our patients? We talk about mental health, but this alarmism is going to make that even worse.
Well, the thing I'm getting, it's almost like a situation where, we've dealt with these, I hate to equate it to this, but like the mass shootings, that we've dealt with them, we go, oh my goodness, everybody gets up in arms about it. But as these variants, just one after another, come down the pike, is the public, are we getting callous to this whole thing? Well, here we go again, how serious is the public how much alarm is the public really having? I question that, whether we're there's the response that we say you had a year ago, for example. I mean, everybody was really up in arms, and I just don't know. I don't know if it's
Well,
as much now as what we've seen in the past. Any
the thing
thoughts
that
on
got
that?
me about Delta that I thought was at least somewhat reasonable. Nobody in the early summer wanted to go back into precautions and mass at church and all that.
Right.
But it was the hospitalizations and it was the ICU admits and
Mhm.
that
Yeah, but
became
that's
the
it. That's it.
validating, you
Right.
know, hey, you're dealing with something
Exactly.
here.
Exactly.
And we're so far from being able to get into that level of what should be public concern. If we start seeing those things, then yes, we need to protect our healthcare workers. We need,
Right.
but you're not going to be able to jump at every variant and lock down and batten the hatches until proven otherwise, because our society is already fatigued with this.
Right.
They're not, and at this point, when you've already got 17 countries, Larry, or 12 or whatever
17.
it is. Well, if we're at 17 countries, obviously the door is already open. You know, it's not like you're limiting it to
the
South
horse is out of the barn. The horse is out of the barn.
Right.
It's going to get here. I'm not saying we
what
don't
can
do things to mitigate that, but I would say the thing that still has been proven more than anything, I'd submit travel bans have never worked. Masking has worked, and vaccines have worked. Vaccines have worked. So if anything, Delta gave us a boost on vaccines, right? How many people came out and started getting vaccines when Delta variant came around? All of a sudden we saw an uptick, and maybe we'll see that again. But yes, Katie bar the door every time there's a new variant that pops up is counterproductive, as evidenced by the stock market. I mean, it's the bottom out of it.
The other thing is we talked about this a long time ago, but viruses are going to change, and they try to change to protect themselves. And being more infectious is a protection for the virus. So as they infect and become more infectious to somebody else, that's good for them. But becoming more dangerous, more lethal is counterproductive to the virus.
Yeah.
And that's not what it wants to do. So
increases the load.
So what we need to concentrate on is people just need to realize vaccines, while they may not be 93%, maybe they're only 75%. Who knows? We don't know at this point. But they're still the best treatment we have. And if you get vaccinated, at least what's being reported, not studied, but what's being reported is that you do better.
One thing you can't account for vaccines just by analyzing the DNA is cell-mediated immunity. We focus so much on antibody levels and what antibodies mean and whether or not the spike can evade antibodies. But cell-mediated immunity, which is the other little brother of antibody-mediated immunity in your immune system, is by far the more important component. And that's why we are recommending the second vaccine. That's why we're recommending the boosters, because it looks like the CMI is really, really increased in that situation and probably is preserved against a lot more targets than just the antibody-mediated immunity. So the antibodies are still that's a little bit more insider baseball. But the bottom line is the vaccines are still really, really important for the CMI just as much as the antibody.
One question I have in that regard in vaccine, I was thinking about this afternoon, is as we tweak, as these variants come down the line, and we have that ability to fairly quickly, in a matter of days, to tweak the vaccine. Will there be a trip point where somebody that has already had the booster, but the vaccine effectiveness is, say, 40% or 50%? Is that going to cause us to need to boost again to up that number, or do you just go with what you got? And is it going to be effective enough? Does anybody have any answer on that one? I don't know.
Well, I know there's a study going on looking at that.
Yeah.
John, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just thinking one of the interesting things is, what are the clinical trials being done in South Africa? Presumably if they've got the biggest cluster of cases, then what can we learn about the population there? Obviously, it's not exactly representative of any other population around the world, but it's it's the best place we could go right now to run some trials. And the trial that makes me interested is how do the antivirals do on this? Because if you talk about an agent,
Merck took a hit today. Did you see that?
Sorry,
the new Merck data came out, and when they dove down a little bit, it was a lot less effective. It was only about 30%. I think they had 1 death versus 9 deaths in the control group or something like that. But it was only about 30% against severe disease, whereas the original data had been 50%. Now, the Pfizer pill, remember, the molnupiravir is a very novel mechanism of action, whereas the Pfizer drug administered with ritonavir is a more traditional, I guess, antiviral approach. So I'll be curious to see what that data shows. But so again, to your point, John, I mean, seeing the antiviral efficacy may be difficult now in Omicron when it's turning out that this drug may not be as effective as we thought it once was anyway,
But I just think when we're dealing with a new threat, let's throw all of our clinical studies and of all of our therapeutic weight against it and get the information out early so we know what we're dealing with and the best way to treat it if it's severe, and if it's more manageable. We owe it. If we're going to go off and blow the whistle and create the panic, then we owe it to everyone to get in there with good information, good clinical trials. And in this case, it would be in South Africa, presumably, or maybe Israel. It would be in some places where we've got to get the information that the design the studies and get them producing knowledge that we can use quicker. And I'll just dial back on that one step back to the United States. We're seeing the increase in cases in the Northeast of Delta. And, a lot of that is deferred. Maybe, it's climate issues, it's whatever with winter coming in there. But why don't we at this point have, okay, here are states like Oklahoma that have been much more relaxed, and here's Oregon that's much more buttoned down. At this point, we should be able to get data around who's really winning at this, and winning on terms of not the infection rate of the week, but who's suffered higher mortality, who's suffered higher long-term disability. I don't see any, like, here are the 4 states we're going to run as the negative control, Oklahoma and Florida and some other places. And here's the positive control, New York, and where we should have that by now. It's just so we don't analyze the variable. We don't pick apart any variables here to dive in and help ourselves understand this. It seems not none. I'm not saying none, but it seems like the wealth of information for 2 years and the millions of cases. I mean, the N is going to be the problem here. I guarantee you're going to have a big enough N
to find whatever you want.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's the other problem, I guess. But
or,
I don't
or not find whatever you don't want, right?
A question I have, which I don't have an answer to, so I'll throw it out to you all.
There's a lot of questions.
What good are the home tests, especially with the variants? I
think they're better. So it's interesting. We should get into the diagnostics because that's actually been a pretty big point of conversation around Omicron is the S gene dropout on the biggest platform, which is the Thermo Fisher TaqMan PCR. It's complicated, but the way the PCR test works is there's actually 2 or 3 different gene products that it targets to look at. Now, as you can imagine, what it's doing is it's kind of looking for a fingerprint. So it's looking for 3 different fingerprints, and if you know that these 3 fingers are supposed to be there in a COVID infection, you look for these 3 fingerprints, and then that spits out a positive test. If only 2 of them are positive, then that might mean that it's not COVID or it's a false positive. If only one of them is positive, it'll come back as an indeterminate. But as you can imagine, if that fingerprint changes a little bit because of the genetic code, then all of a sudden that one might drop out. And because of that, they've sent that out as a way to look for Omicron. Say, hey, if you're running this test and this one gene target is called S gene dropout, S gene failure or something or other, failure to detect or something. If that drops out, then you're supposed to be thinking about Omicron. We kind of did this a little bit with I think Alpha variant had an S gene dropout on one of the tests also. It wasn't the Thermo Fisher, it was a different platform. But the bottom line is there are little tricks here that you can look at. The antigen tests at home, the home antigen test should still test positive. A home PCR test will totally depend on what the PCR target is, right? Because if those fingerprints aren't there, then it's going to come back, like you said, Larry. Somebody might exactly take the test, say, I'm fine, be running around and still have that. So so that requires a lot of heads up on the part of lab technicians. It requires a lot of heads up on the parts of lab administration to recognize that they know what tests they're running. And it's not just on Thermo Fisher machines. It might be that they're using the Thermo Fisher platform on a different machine. So it, just you gotta know, and it requires some cognition on the part of the doctor ordering the test to understand what it means also.
I was going to say, it requires communication.
Mm-hmm.
You may have read something about it, but as a general physician, a gastroenterologist who doesn't deal with virology constantly, I've read nothing. And so, if a patient asks me, I go, I don't really know. And so, again, John talks about we need to be doing studies. Well, whatever studies we're doing, we need to communicate to the physicians who are taking care of these people, to the public, so that everybody is understanding what we're doing.
Wouldn't it be nice if there was a roadmap of the, in other diseases, you always know the big new trial that's coming out that's going to answer X, Y, or Z question. It'd be sure nice to know what are the big, juicy, well-run trials that are pending for us to get some answers. I know we know a couple of them, but considering how much research is going on, it'd be fascinating to know how many really good studies are in the pipeline for us to have some answers at some proposed months from now, 2, 4, whatever it is. It's like we're flying without, we're just waiting for a random hit of knowledge. Okay, great. I just think again, I'm not an infectious disease specialist, but I have no concept of what the map of expected good new knowledge and when it's going to hit. But in other diseases, you tend to know that if you're a specialist in the area and you're paying attention. So,
and isn't that what the CDC is supposed to be doing? Is running those tests? I mean, do we even know on people who have what I'll call natural immunity, who had the disease, what the level of antibodies, how long do they last, how much protection do they give? We don't know any of that. And yet all we talk about is vaccines. We don't know about testing. We don't know about natural immunity. There's so much that could be being studied by the CDC and putting out information to us.
The CDC should be the hub. And at the CDC, we sorely need somebody that can communicate in a way that not only can reach us as physicians, but also give a clear message to the public. We just have not got that. John's brought this up several times, and I certainly agree with him on this. I think we're just kind of waddling around, kind of willy-nilly, and we just react rather than bring out facts based on what we're seeing. It's just there's a lack of communication at this point.
It's a lot like the OU offense the last 4 weeks.
That.
So I just had to throw that in.
No, you're right on.
Well, we are kind of fighting the last war, as they say. Here we are at 2 years in, and we've learned a little bit, but I'm not sure that we're, clearly, if the spike protein has changed so much on Omicron, then you would imagine that the monoclonal antibody therapies wouldn't be as effective potentially. But again, that's not even part of the conversation that's going on right now. It's almost like we're starting back from ground zero. Oh, it's got this genetic fingerprint. It might mean this and it might mean that. It's not oh, well, we're so fortunate 2 years in, we got antibodies we can look at, monoclonals. We even have convalescent plasma if you want to go completely old school. And we could look at that. And we could look, it's almost, I don't know. It's like we don't want to be smarter.
It's just,
Well, let's jump from how dumb we are.
I just wanted to say I've also noticed one other thing about Omicron, and I think the idea that the unvaccinated serve as this pool for accelerated mutation. I'm really worried about the bats in China. You know, we're sitting here making this virus more and more lethal and transmissible. If it came to us from them, we're going to send it back to the bats with a fury. So, you know, I'm interested
Vaccinate
to
the
see
bats.
Well,
What?
the deer have it.
We need to have a vaccination effort for the bats, right?
Yeah, we need to protect the bats against this human incubation and acceleration of the virus. Where are the vets? Worried about the bats? Come on.
We've already given it to the deer. You know, the deer have it now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Vets for
Yeah.
vaccine bats. Absolutely.
Oh,
Nobody wants to deal with a bat, John. Not even a veterinarian. Nobody wants to deal with it. Flying mice. Girl.
yeah.
Mm.
I don't even know what to say to that. But John,
I've
you brought
succeeded
up.
then.
Yes, you have. You brought up about the federal judge's decision in Missouri to put an injunction on the federal mandate on healthcare workers. And we've tried to stay away from politics, although this is sort of intermixed with politics. We also know that the Court of Appeals did away with the mandate for employers who have more than 100 employees back in November.
Mhm.
So the mandates for vaccination have been blocked at this point. What do we think about that, especially healthcare workers? I'm not, so concerned about employers with 100 employees. I think that should be their decision. But healthcare workers, especially in hospitals where people with immune suppression come in, with people with all kinds of illness come in, and they expect good healthcare delivery. What do we think about healthcare workers not being vaccinated? Who wants to start on that?
I will. I don't know. Boy, we're not supposed to be political on this show. I'm not crazy about mandates from the government. I do think that employers should be able to mandate what they want. And I have supported healthcare coalitions in the state that have chosen to do that. I guess what I'm still so saddened about this, and what I think the historians will write about forever, is how disinformation ruled the day. And the absolute shamelessness with which different people have embraced disinformation and embraced these alternative theories to people not getting a vaccination. I think anybody in healthcare who went into healthcare to take care of other people to not get this vaccination has to seriously consider whether or not they are in the right field. It's not congruent. I'm sorry. The vaccine is safe. It is effective. And if you honestly went into this field because of that, if you went in it just because you needed a job and you make some money, I guess maybe that's a better excuse than anything. But if you went into this field because you wanted to help people, it's unfathomable to me that people would not do that. Now, I haven't read the opinion. I didn't get a chance to read the article that John sent earlier, but I'm still fascinated. They were able to change the drinking age because of withholding federal funds. Is that still going to be a way for the government? Because I'm telling you, there's no way healthcare systems are getting out of this with the withholding federal funds. It's going to have to happen if CMS is holding back the money. So I'd be curious to see how all that plays out. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand that. But I just think the fact that this is something that we even have to kind of debate. The same healthcare workers I talked to about COVID are more than happy to roll up their arm for Hep B or MMR or any of those kinds of things. And I'm absolutely dumbfounded. And I think had it not been in an election year, this never would have been an issue. And so when I've spoken to to leaders around the state and around the community. I've asked them, message the reality, not what's politically expedient, because I think that has changed the timbre of everything. And as a healthcare worker, I never would have thought that. As a doctor, I never would have thought that I would have had to combat that when I'm talking to my patients. It's absolutely, I mean, I can't tell you, I see sick patients on a daily basis. And I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about non-COVID stuff. People that I see are sent to me because they are sick. And they will let me do all kinds of things and give them all kinds of medicines. But I bring up COVID, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that we're even having this discussion. This is exactly what I went to school to learn about. And it's even more frustrating when you're speaking to a nurse or another physician more than anyone. It's just like, I can't believe we're having this conversation. So I don't know. That's probably not what you want to talk about, but that's what I feel like talking about. Anyway.
Well, I think the context you set for that is absolutely right. I think employers still can set whatever rules for their employees, and healthcare has a responsibility. Hospital executives and their medical teams need to set the standard. I know way back in the day, hepatitis B vaccines were new, and they made us all get them. It's like, this isn't unusual when you're in the healthcare setting for your own safety and that of people around you that you're asked to take vaccinations, and that's appropriate. But to me, it's the setting of the hospital. We already have a mechanism for that, right? The hospital is the employer, is the way we've got that. And if we want to change it, if we want to come up with certain levels of risk that we need a bigger herd to really help us, we have legislative action that allows us to do that. That's what a democracy, that's why we have legislators, is that they write laws that represent the will of the people. So instead of hiding behind, OSHA and picking an arbitrary 100 as the employee level, which just screams, convenience and it's not policy. It's some sort of weird no man's land of expediency. So to me, I'm like, let's pass the law. If we want a national law, great. If we can't pass that, then states pass your laws and enforce them. But the idea that we're going to let regulators go behind the scenes, I don't think anybody likes the idea of getting an end run done on this. Put it out in the open, have the arguments, let our representatives, not somebody who's been at the NIH for 40 years. Let's let the NIH folks should advise. I'm not saying that they don't have valuable knowledge, but that's not the way we make decisions.
Boy, John, I don't know that I 100% agree. I think it might work on the federal level, but I'm just thinking about the Oklahoma legislature.
Yeah.
I was going to bring that up.
I'm just thinking there is no way that anything like that would ever pass here.
No.
When you've got this clown in Yukon and this clown Nathan Dahman, these other guys that are just absolutely vehemently anti-science.
But you're still left with the employers are still free to do what they want, right?
I would hope so.
OBI, we can set a mandate.
But then, how many challenges have we seen that said nobody should be mandated to have a vaccine by their employer? I don't know. I hope so.
I think one of the problems is the word mandate.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not.
It doesn't sell. It doesn't sell.
That's what people are fighting against. Not everybody is truly fighting against taking the vaccine, getting a jab, as they say in England. It's the word mandate. They don't want to be told they have to. They want to do it on their own. Well, I disagree, John. I agree with David. I don't trust our state legislature, and I've spent a lot of time out there, probably more than all of you all together. And I don't trust them one bit to pass a law that's unpoliticized, that, they'll look for what Trump says is okay, and they might pass that.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Well, we're in a standoff right now with the Guard. The National Guard. Our state's saying that you don't have to get the military personnel do not have to get it. They're in direct contradiction to what the federal mandate is on that. For how's that going to work out? So
Well, I guess if you took this argument that our state is definitely not going to mandate it and is going to fight certain federal aspects of it, and let's pick on New York. New York will pass, that you can be thrown into prison if you don't, get vaccinated, and you can't go over your house. They'll be at the other end of the spectrum,
right?
But at the end of the day, shouldn't a couple of years into this, New York have the data to say, hey, look, we have 0 cases now, or we have 0 hospitalizations, and then be able to look at the Oklahoma people and say, wow, you really did us wrong. How many people died because of your political posturing and bad decision making? Isn't that sort of the way that I mean, it's a brutal kind of imagined resolution to this, but aren't the voters entitled to look at the results of legislators who for political reasons inject, a poorly designed policy or inflexible policy or whatever, however you would label that? I don't know if
I wish that voters were that reasonable anymore, though. I mean, I think you've got these people get into office based on the loudest 5 or 10% and saying what they think is going to get him through a prime. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I hate to call out certain representatives, but there are a few that are just absolutely off the rails, and they're never going to listen to science, which is funny because if I came at them with science and other things that were expedient for them politically, like climate change or something like that, they'd be happy to embrace it. But for this, they aren't, and it's because it simply isn't. And I think you've seen that at all levels, unfortunately, quite a bit. So I hope, and that's because, again, these loudest folks are getting the most press and the most, I can tell you at one place where I do vaccines, a business here in town, there were a few people that were very, very vocally anti-vaccine, very vocal. And it wasn't that many, but very vocal. And then at this business, they offered booster shots one day. And there were 100 people that showed out. And I was like, where are these people talking? Where is the reasonable people talking about this stuff? Why aren't they shouting from the rooftops, And you're right. The only way you can do that is to vote them out. But it's too nuanced the thing now.
I guess the default that we're dealing with, though, is we're dealing with the courts get to decide it all, right?
Yeah, right. That's a great point.
At the end of the day, the poor voter turnout and the lack of voter education, if we say we can't go that direction, we have to acknowledge what we seem to have come up with in this country, that everything eventually goes to the courts and gets appealed 4 times, and then maybe either a circuit court or the Supreme Court decides for the good of us all. And that's
not good either.
That's fairly random too.
Cumbersome system. Yeah, very slow moving.
And relatively random. You change a couple of representatives on any one court, and you flipped it.
Well, and we've sort of strayed away from the original question, but I agree with David. It's unfathomable to me that a healthcare worker, somebody who went into it to help their brethren, to help their fellow man through days of illness, through difficult times, would not even consider taking a vaccine, knowing that they could then more likely to spread the virus to a helpless individual who's in the hospital, possibly fighting for their life. That just makes no sense to me. So no matter what you say about business, healthcare is a special segment. And it just seems to me 100% of anybody who ever sees a patient, and that includes the janitors on, because everybody has some contact in hospitals with a patient, needs to be vaccinated. It just needs to be. Dwight, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think it just indicates the depth of the philosophical chasm we're dealing with here, and people are just dug in. Okay, you believe this or you believe that, and there's no middle ground. There's no reasoning. We can't look at data. It's all everything's so biased now. And I think it even trickles into our own profession. And we haven't really seen this before. It's like David said, everybody line get to Hep B, and all that, and without question. But with this issue, it really,
the other thing that's amazing is we don't layer in the context of our other vaccine successes, right? So, it's not like vaccines as a principle. Really, if you're objecting to this vaccine at this point, it has to be 100% on the notion of the technology that's being deployed here. And that should be the only element that's getting any kind of discussion about what the mRNA vaccine does, right? And I guess we have other variants too. We need to lay those out on the table, but the one that most people are concerned with.
Right.
And to me, that's the only difference for healthcare workers who are reluctant to get this done, or any worker. If you believe in polio, and you can look around and see that we almost had that nailed until COVID let the gas up on that, or you look at smallpox, or you look at the successes that we've had, but we don't seem to have that context as your only argument has to be with the technology, and then we need to double down on explaining the technology and making people comfortable, and how this vaccine, even though it used fetal cells, is the same as these other 12 vaccines that you didn't seem to care about, that they use fetal cells. So again, we have a weapon that we haven't deployed here.
But wouldn't you think, though, that when you are arguing with somebody who has just got this notion that is stuck in the mud about this is the way it's going to be, you bring up a point, they will always find a counterpoint, because they simply don't want to concede that point, whether it's reasonable or not. Because I'll be honest with you, since the first after about the first 3 months, I'm not really sure there were any reasonable objections to vaccination after about the first 3 to 6 months. And yet people will still continue to tout these certain things. And now what's happening is, you've got people using religious exemptions. There's I can promise you, there's no mainstream religion that advocates against vaccine use, generally speaking. Okay, so I don't want to get into the nuances of fetal cells and everything like that, but generally speaking, that advocates against vaccine use for mainstream religions. I recognize that there are lots of other religions out there, but people are using that as their out now, and that we have seen that all the time. It's just kind of the disingenuity. It makes you a little bit sad for society in general that people are willing to be so disingenuous, lie to your face, leave in the middle of the night to go to Southern California. I mean, these kinds of things are just what we have to deal with. He's obviously an anti-vaxxer. That's why he left Norman.
There you go.
He went to the wrong state, I think.
It makes me sad that they're so disingenuous anymore, because I don't think there's been a valid intellectual argument for quite some time about why not to get a vaccine.
But wouldn't it be nice if we were using, I'm just sitting here thinking of the algorithm that you start with. Can you agree with me that smallpox vaccines have been a success, and that polio has been a success, and that, you agree that vaccines have been, and just go through the logical progression, because a lot of times our ill discipline in shaping our thinking on a complex topic destroys us, because then you allow somebody to bounce around to every pot, and you don't go linear. What we probably should have is a little primer that takes you from smallpox and polio all the way through to the data we have, increasing data every day, more data that floats in and says this vaccine and now the boosters are what you need to be doing. And here's the history of the last 50 years. Well, actually, I guess you could go back to cowpox and Jenner way back.
That's
but
right.
The history of vaccination tells you, this is the way to go. And there's nothing that sidetracks that with the current technology. It's all theoretical. There's no data that says, there are more mutations or whatever. I guess, you'll have to believe me that there's no, a probe, put in there. There's no secret.
Prove
No,
it. Prove it.
no chips.
chips.
I'm going to bring Scott in with questions at this point.
Now, on this vein, so by the way, the courts so far have upheld the private businesses, and once that Moderna, or rather Pfizer, was FDA approved in August, it was game over. And we've talked with Dr. Chansolme about this. Once businesses said they had a approved vaccine, FDA approved, it was just, you could go on any of the networks, in the business networks, and it's game over. So the game's been over for a long time. They're just people hanging on. 94% of federal workers are vaccinated. And for these big businesses, you're vaccinated or else. I mean, the game's over. It's just how long everybody's going to hang on to this. But the aspect of higher premiums, now there's another little incentive that when it starts getting in people's pockets. Here is, let me see if this is the right one. There's Cousin Kelly, our RN.
No,
this is all coming, right?
I don't know.
I don't think Medicare will do it. I wouldn't be surprised if some other people did. I mean, I think everybody accepts the fact that if you're a smoker, you're going to pay higher premiums, right? How many minds did that change? There's a very famous. So my brother's an attorney. We're talking about a Supreme Court decision where I think it was when they struck down the large Cokes being charged extra in New York. You remember when they did that? When if you got a 32-ounce big gulp or something like that, you had to charge an extra pack or something. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and essentially Judge Scalia said, "Are we going to start charging people who don't eat enough broccoli more?" So there's a little bit of a sliding scale there. But for something that is so easily tangible as getting a vaccine, I think it's only going to be a matter of time until the private insurers do it. I don't know that Medicare and Medicaid will do it, but I think it's only going to be a matter of time until some of the private insurers say, "Nah, you're going to pay an extra $30 a month in premium so that we can cover everybody else who didn't take their vaccines." And I get it.
Wouldn't that be an
Like
awesome? Wouldn't that be a tremendous benefit from this pandemic if we actually started to get the actuarial data on outcomes and make that part of our conversation?
I promise you that data is solid. I promise you.
Well, it's there, but it's not surfaced as the unvaccinated cost the general public who's paying for healthcare X million or billion. And those who are vaccinated only cost Y billion, but we never have those conversations about what macroeconomic effects these choices have. Now, I think if you go to private insurers, they may kick it in, although most private insurers they don't have tremendous clubs on smoking or drinking or a lot of those other risk behaviors. So I'm not sure how big a club they can wield on this either, but at least they can send some signal, I would imagine.
Certainly for life insurance and things like that, right? I mean, that's certainly a place where you see it. I love that. I love the one you put up from Lonnie there about Washington State. You remember when they fired the Washington State coach? They had this huge article in the Athletic about everything that the state they literally had some of the biggest names in the state, and Washington is a hotbed of infectious diseases expertise. It's the home to the best program in the country. And the first question, they brought someone in, paid the smartest guy in the state and arguably the world to come and talk to him about vaccines. And the first question this guy asks him is, "Did Bill Gates help make the vaccine?" I mean, if you can't fix that, John, I just don't know how much somebody's If you can't fix that,
well, that's the first thing you put in the questions.
No, man.
In your algorithm of questions.
Well, for these private businesses, when these deadlines are coming, there are a lot of people that are getting salvation 24 hours before they're going to lose their job. I mean, a lot of this is, some hesitate. One thing about the hesitation, I've seen some of the commentators, especially in the business world, going, "Yeah, you can talk to me about freedom and all these sorts of things, but it's his business or her business or their business, and the shareholders want profit. And if you don't want to play along, then go someplace else." This is the ball game.
Yeah, you have a choice. They all argue we want choice. It should be our choice. You have a choice. You can work here or you can not work here. It's a choice. but the owner should have the ability to make that decision.
If you're signing
Unfortunately,
my paycheck, you probably get to tell me a little bit about what the minimum requirements are for the job. To sign a paycheck for somebody who ends up in the hospital for, especially think about this, especially if the Biden administration gets some of the things they want with paid time off and leave and everything like that, and I'm hiring somebody, do I have to pay for them for 6 weeks to be in the hospital because they chose not to get vaccinated? I don't know. Was that really my fault?
no.
There's one other bit of data that I'd be interested in seeing. Is I had a conversation with somebody who had a relative that was at a large company, and there's a deadline to get it, and they were complaining loudly. I said, "Well, have they made objection? Is it a religious objection, whatever?" It was like, "No, they haven't done it." So how many? I mean, there's a lot of people attending press conferences talking about it, but the question I would have is how many people that are actually say they have objections to this are actually going through the process,
right,
and going to the bosses, human resources, and saying, "I've got the problem," and I don't know what the number would be. This individual had not even thought about it, but they were very loud, very press conference oriented, but still hadn't done anything in the process. So you wonder I'm wondering how deep that dedication is, if it's just more political. The bottom line is this all changed whenever our election, which was held in 90 days in November, December, and January. And that's what happened when a president changed. They have enormous power, and they can hold those CMS funds somewhere. Federal judges come and go. At some point, the bureaucrats can cut the money off to people that don't want to play by the rules. It's just, hey, listen, my great friend, the late David Dank, used to talk about the golden rule in politics. And the rule is, he who's got the gold makes the rules.
Yeah.
You got it.
Well, there's another interesting phenomenon we've touched upon at the beginning of the show that factors into all the options in front of the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Well, that's the judiciary, I guess. But that's the fact that the fatigue is going to totally limit the field of play here in another year. People are not going to be able to make grand moves and big moves when the public has stopped caring. And unless we get to a point where we've got another spike or there's ongoing, you can already see that the public's very fatigued with this story, and it's going to be harder and harder to motivate them to dramatic shifts or policy moves or anything, whether it's cutting off CMS funding, or which is going to all of a sudden look like they're taking away my Medicare. Somebody's going to spin that story, even if it's selective and it's done with the best intentions for the herd. So again, I would say that's another variable that the clock is ticking on, unless this virus keeps on throwing Delta level damage at us time and time again, we're going to lose the audience and therefore the capacity to make change.
Yeah, I think it's true.
Any other questions that you have, Scott?
I think our audience is largely pro-vaccine tonight. I don't see many of the folks who oftentimes make 75,000.
You haven't had to turn the filters on for the.
I have not turned one filter on. After a while, I think there was a time about 2 months ago, you guys will appreciate this, that we would occasionally get comments that I thought were a little edgy and out there. And so one night, Candace and I were talking, she said, just put them out there for the doctors to see. And so I started doing that, and I started feeling sorry for the people making the crazy posts. It was like throwing those questions out to you guys, and it was like, oh, I feel bad for that person. They'll never come back. And it has happened a lot, frankly. So nothing more.
I'll tell you what, if you guys wanted some alone time to go think about this, you could go to the Toyota Center in Houston right now. Plenty of wide open spaces there. Holy cow, I'm watching the Thunder game here in the background.
I was going to say,
you think Paycom Arena is empty? Woo.
Oh, man.
It looks like COVID's going crazy in Houston or something. I don't know. There's nobody there.
I do have one other thing. I got a note from our friend at COVID-19 in Oklahoma who was noted Dr. Chansolme comment about politicians. And he said, tell him he's right. And he named one and said he's used the I word. I wouldn't say who it is, but it's a person from Broken Arrow. So I'm passing that on to you, Dr. Chansolme, that our friend COVID-19 Oklahoma is going, yes. And I can name names. So
you could almost do a roll call and name names. it's I don't know. It's just sad. It's
It
just
is.
sad.
It
Is
is.
Oklahoma really this uneducated? I don't think we are. I just, I recognize we're independent. I live here. I love it. I mean, I'm never
Sure.
moving, but I recognize we're independent and we don't want to be told what to do. But the fact of the matter is we're also a good community that does the right thing for our community. And it just, we haven't. And the leaders are part of that problem. So,
Dr. Bookman, refresh my memory, but wasn't there back when the anti-vaccine thing was starting to pick up and OSMA, you were president, I think president before you, and after, there were some rules that were being sought where people who were refusing vaccines just had to look at a video, as I recall.
That
Oh,
was,
And they couldn't
yeah.
get that you couldn't get it past
No.
the legislature.
no.
Well, we couldn't get it through the legislature. You're right. It was before you could say no for your children to
Right.
be vaccinated. You had to go to a health department, county health department, and watch a video. And then you could sign the papers, but you
Right.
couldn't do it at the school. What was going on was that parents would show up at school and say, "Oh, I don't have the papers." And the schools were saying, "Here, just sign this and you get out of it."
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
no education whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
So we tried to pass that. The legislature would not even touch it. They wouldn't pass it. So we went to the health department, who did pass it as a
Mhm.
rule. The governor signed it.
Mhm.
And then behind closed doors, my opinion, strictly my opinion, he got the commissioner of health or the head of the health department once COVID hit to say, we're going to forego all of these rules.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And so
he got turned
even though
around.
he signed it, it
Yeah.
never went into effect.
Nope.
Mhm.
And it was only trying to educate people. Communication and education should be common. And David brings up Oklahoma. That's part of the problem. We have lack of education in this state and no communication, and therefore we get laws like we get because they yell the loudest.
Uh-huh.
And some of those legislators don't even know how to read the law, let alone make one. So
Well,
Let me
and a
call
lot
the
of
next
it's
one
the
up for you.
a lot of the people that are protesting against vaccination don't accept the material that we're presenting to them. They think it's not legitimate data. That they'll come up with that too. So
the answer to this question is yes. A physician can refuse care and fire a patient at any time.
it does happen.
I have fired several patients
Mhm.
for
Me
various
too.
reasons. So, yeah, you absolutely, as a physician, have that right.
So that's
very nice. Thank you.
that's a very nice one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lenny.
That's nice.
Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the bats are mad about it. Let me tell you.
I would actually totally disagree with that statement. They've done plenty for COVID. COVID flourishing. COVID doing just fine.
Great. That's great.
Well, we're going to release the bats on Southern California.
Yes. Yes.
Release the
Wow.
bats.
Yes. Oh.
Yes.
All right.
Because Southern Cal always follows the rules, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
that's
Wink,
stickler
wink.
for following the rules there.
Wow.
I moved here from Southern California, so I'm well aware. So
That's OJ's university.
Oh, so many bad memes this weekend.
Distinguished
Can't
alum.
even go into them.
Distinguished alum. Nice.
Yeah.
Recruiting violate. Well, let's not go there.
Yeah. All right. We've gone the hour. We've talked about Lincoln Riley, which is the most important topic. I think it's time to thank our listeners and, hold off further opinions on Lincoln Riley till next week.
Yeah, I wonder what Santa Claus is bringing us this week. We'll have to see.
we will have more in the Lincoln Riley story.
I just, for the
Stay
OSU
tuned.
fans out there, great job
Absolutely.
playing for the championship.
Yeah.
Beat Baylor.
Congratulations.
Nobody
Baylor.
wants
Go to
Baylor to
12.
win.
Nobody wants Baylor to win.
No.
Absolutely.
But I have
Please
had a
keep it in
couple
the
of-
state.
I've
Talk
had a couple
about
of-
people who play with rough and dirty with the rules.
I've had a couple of OSU folks today who have said, could you guys just let us have the weekend to enjoy?
Oh man.
Anyway, go,
man.
folks. All right, thanks.
I heard Art Briles may be the next OU coach, so you know.
Yeah.
We'll see. Was the over and under of names be 25 this week? So it'll be some fun. So.
No doubt.
All right. Thank you all, doctors, and thanks to our viewers, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye.